now I want to bring in CBS News Face the Nation moderator and chief foreign affairs correspondent Margaret Brennan. She has been reporting all of this out. I've been quoting from her reporting throughout the day. So, Margaret, what is the latest that you can tell us?
Well, I think you know that the White House is clearly messaging they are bracing for a few hours worth of attacks, that this series of drones that were launched from Iranian territory, as a U.S. official confirmed to me, are not the extent of this reprisal attack that Iran has launched on Israel.
So more are expected to come then? I just want to be clear on that.
Further waves of attack are expected to come over the next few hours. Yes, the drones are not the extent of it. A senior White House official confirmed that the drones that already have been launched were launched from within Iranian territory. As Olivia Gazis was talking earlier, this is then defined as a state-on-state attack. This is not Iran sort of masking its actions by using some of those proxy forces, in other words, local militias scattered throughout the region who receive some level of support. No, this is a state-on-state reprisal. The Iranian foreign minister has been posting about the calls that he has been receiving from diplomats all around the world pressing for a lack of escalation. And we are really, Lana, bracing for the next few hours in order to be able to assess the impact of any potential reprisal strike here. And we know that Israel's response, and they will respond, will be calibrated by the impact of what happens over the next few hours.
And in that way, there are hopes and prayers that there will be limited casualties from any of these strikes. And Margaret, I'm so glad that you referenced the significant change to have this be a state-on-state reprisal. As Olivia was saying, she was even surprised at the initial reporting that these were launched from within Iranian territory. Talk to us about how that potentially changes the calculation in terms of a response from Israel and potentially from the United States, as well as other potential implications of these strikes.
Well, in terms of what would be a benefit essentially to a potential impact is the fact that Israel is very ready for this kind of attack. This is the kind of thing that they have planned and modeled for years. They were caught blindsided by, for example, the October 7th attack and the capabilities of a terrorist force that they vastly underestimated. If anything, Israel is over-prepared in terms of an air defense system that is one of the strongest in the world, as Sam Vinograd was explaining, multi-layered in the ability to defend. But what it does do is it causes this state-on-state tension that you're removing any sense of deniability. But remember, this is Iran feeling it has to respond to what Israel did with that April 1st attack, going in and bombing what Iran says was a diplomatic facility. In Iran's view, it was Israel that made the state-on-state, because a diplomatic facility is defined as sovereign territory of the country it houses. So in Israel's and Iran's view here, they're looking at this through different lenses, right? So that's where it was already defined in the eyes of the Iranians, and now it is just overtly so. As we were talking, though, about the militias and the proxy forces, that threat also exists. And that is a scattered and diffuse threat that is more challenging for the United States or the Israelis to be able to defend against. One of those proxy forces is Hezbollah in the north. In southern Lebanon, in northern Israel, they remain a threatening proxy force. To date, since October 7th, they have really not engaged in the way that some had feared. That's something to watch. Watch what happens with the Houthis in particular in the Red Sea area. That's something I'm hearing from U.S. officials that they are very much prepared for. More attacks on vessels, for example, in that Red Sea area. But you also have Iraq, you have Syria, and militias scattered throughout there. That's an area to watch as well. So this is not a story that ends today. It's a matter of really managing the level of escalation.
Margaret, it's such an interesting point that you make, because Iran supreme leader, the United States, Israel, there has been public messages about trying to contain this, even as Iran supreme leader said that they were going to retaliate, that it was necessary. As you list all of these different disparate groups that are supported by Iran, I'm wondering what kind of power the central government actually has over these groups, and the chance for a miscalculation or one leader of one of these groups taking action that has casualty implications that further escalate the war.
That is one of those unknowns that worries U.S. officials the most. You put your finger on it. It is what you can't plan for. And the fact is, according to U.S. officials, Israeli officials that I've spoken with as well, there isn't the same degree of command and control over some of these militias that there once was when the IRGC commander Qasem Soleimani was alive. The United States killed him in a drone attack when he was going into Iraq years ago during the Trump administration. Ever since that time, the military commanders who filled his shoes haven't really been able to choreograph in the same way that he did. So that's not to say Iran doesn't have influence. It's just not as choreographed and controlled in the same way that it once was. And that worries U.S. officials in particular, because it makes it harder to exert pressure and get some scale back there. But I should say that ever since that strike that happened that killed the 3 American service people in Jordan, carried out by an Iranian-backed militia, we haven't seen the same high degree, not the same tempo of attacks by militias. And Lana, this is a conversation that will come up again in the coming days. The Prime Minister of Iraq is going to walk into the White House April 15th for a serious conversation with President Biden about, among many things, the Iranian militias that operate, or Iranian-backed militias that operate within his territory. And how can he counterbalance that while still allowing for and wanting U.S. troops to remain in Iraq? There are 2,500 U.S. troops in Iraq right now. And that is an active negotiation, what happens to them next.
And each of those different factors potentially having implications in this ongoing conflict. Margaret, I know that you have been working all of your sources. You have the best sources. What are you hearing from the White House? What are you hearing from others in terms of what the Biden administration is willing to do?
Well, the United States and President Biden have had this position that they will have the military back, so to speak, of Israel no matter what. But what they don't say publicly is their concern about calibrating the Israeli response. The U.S. and the Biden administration would like to watch these next few hours to be able to assess, are any of these things launched by Iran, whether they are drones or perhaps missiles, later on, do they make it through Israeli air defenses? If they do, what do they hit? Do they cause casualties at all? Or is enough done here that Israel can walk away and say, we can pull back, respond in a way that doesn't further escalate? It's the escalation risk that concerns the Biden administration the most here. And remember, there is a really complicated set of politics within Israel right now.
Absolutely.
There is a prime minister that has a strained relationship with the United States because of some of the decisions that he has made. You have not only the weight that is felt within the intelligence and military services, who have been sharply criticized for failures that led to the horrific terror attack on October 7th. When they got it wrong there is a sense they cannot get anything wrong now. And you had the commander of U.S. forces in the Middle East, General Kurilla, in Israel for a reason. He could help coordinate from afar. He could help coordinate from those bases in Doha, Qatar. And instead, he'd flown there to really try to get inside the Israeli military mind here, to get a sense of how strong this reprisal will be by Israel in the coming day or so. That is expected, that Israel will have some kind of response, and to have the U.S. weigh in. Why? Because Israel is dependent on U.S. military backing. And this could escalate and draw the United States in. And the Biden administration is concerned about not getting pulled into this conflict in a direct way.
Well, and there are also political calculations at play with that as well. Margaret, I know you're eager to do more reporting on this, but I thought I would just read for our viewers a statement from Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu and get your thoughts on it. He said, "I established a clear principle. Whoever hurts us, we hurt him. We will protect ourselves from any threat, and we will do so with coolness and determination." When you read that, Margaret, what did you think? What were you reading between the lines?
Well, Benjamin Netanyahu is the ultimate survivor in Israeli politics. He is the longest-serving prime minister in that country's history, and he has built a career on the promise of being able to protect the security of Israel. He has built his career on that, and he failed to prevent the most horrific slaughter of the Jewish people since the Holocaust. He is being sharply criticized from his own people for that failure, which is why now, in this state-to-state escalation that we are seeing, there is the expectation, and it sounds like that's what he's saying in that statement, that Israel will respond. No matter what, before a single drone or missile hits it, they will respond. That is how I would understand that statement. Because fundamentally, as so many former military officials tell me in particular, Israel has to reestablish deterrence. They have to be able to show they are not weak in this moment of what they feel is vulnerability. The Biden administration is helping them right now because the United States has sent, as our Ellie Watson has reported, not just kept U.S. vessels and destroyers in the region. We both confirmed that the U.S. sent fighter jets. The U.S. is capable of shooting down some of these drones if President Biden ordered it as they cross through airspace. The United States could shoot these down in Syria. They could shoot them down in Iraq. There are a lot of things the United States can do to prevent anything from hitting Israel in a significant way and really try to minimize that so that the expected Israeli response is not further escalatory.
All right. Margaret Brennan, appreciate all of your insight and valuable reporting. Thank you.